special guest. So we have Ms. Mavi Almeida Unco, the current Chief Operations Officer of Teach for Philippines and its incoming CEO. Mavi comes from an extensive background in journalism, research, and business development. She has pioneered TFP's data and impact assessment initiatives since its earliest days and has been vital in shaping the organization's data-driven decision-making culture. Ms. Mavi, thank you for being with us today. And of course, also joining us is Dr. Erica Legara. She is the Academic Program Director of AIM's Master of Science in Data Science program and an appointed chair in data science. Dr. Erica is also a fellow at the Institute of Corporate Directors. Recently, she was also selected as one of the outstanding women in the nation's service or Towns awardees. As a scientist, she specializes in network science, complex systems modeling, computational social science, and AI ethics. Prof. Erica, it's great to have you. And of course, we've met our two speakers from earlier. So I guess to start the conversation, so I realize that we have a lot of questions from the audience online, but before we get to the topic for today, which is education, ChatGPT and education, I really want to understand, I'm curious about your personal experiences with ChatGPT. Like, have you used it? Or what do you see yourself using it for day-to-day? Has it actually changed the way that you do things day-to-day? Maybe we can start with Prof. Chris.
Yeah, short answer, yes, I use it every day for various reasons. Note that ChatGPT, when it was initially created, is really for mental health, mental wellness. That's why if you just want to have a conversation with ChatGPT, especially about the things that you'd like to do in daily life, it's quite useful.
Answer is also yes, I use it every day because I try to do research in ChatGPT. But for just for plain living, for the roles I play every day, I do use it and in collaboration with other tools.
Hello. I'm probably the last adopter. So full disclosure, I only started using it when I got the invite to join the Fireside chat. So when I got the invite, I was like, okay, what can I possibly bring to the table? Obviously, I am among experts in AI, machine learning, things like that, but I work for an education nonprofit, so I guess we would be on the implementing side. So we would be what we would consider, I guess, the most possible end user of an application like ChatGPT. So I started really just using it. I've heard of it, read New York Times articles about it, but recently just started playing with it when I got the invite, and my mind was blown. So I had it like try and draft. So I had just finished writing out a job description for a role that we were gonna hire for in the organization, and I prompted it to write me a job description, and it was very, very eerily similar to what I wrote, that I spent like maybe a couple of hours on, and it wrote me practically the same JD for like, in under 10 seconds. Also used it to create an itinerary for an upcoming trip that I was going on. Eerily close again to what I spent like, again, half a day doing, and then it did the same thing for me. So, I mean, no doubt, like I'm sold on the power of it.
Yeah, obviously yes. So in various hats I wear, I use ChatGPT in most apps that require text. It's really good to engage with it, even in brainstorming ideas. Because I'm also the program director, we're currently marketing the MSDS program, short plug, please apply. So we also use ChatGPT to give some ideas on how to capture markets, for example. Course outlines, the same thing, and write emails. Like what Mavi said, what usually would take us a few hours, when we feed it into ChatGPT, in less than a second or 10 seconds, we get what we need. So yeah.
All right, very interesting answers. I think we can dive into the real topic for today, which is really education as a sector and how ChatGPT is poised to affect a lot of things, even though the effects ripple across society, across domains. A lot of the people here today are really educators, right, teachers. And that is a group that we would like to support moving forward in this new era. So I'm actually curious about, from a teacher's perspective, I think some of us here have, or a lot of us have experience like teaching a class. So from a teacher's perspective, how should we think about incorporating these sorts of tools into the classroom? Like what things do we have to think about in terms of guidelines, in terms of policies. Because clearly, it's here to stay, and we sort of have to adapt to it. So what sorts of things should we be thinking about when designing policies and guidelines from a teacher's perspective?
I'll answer first. So in designing assessments, there are some of the assessments that we allow ChatGPT use for, and there are some assessments that we do not allow ChatGPT use. So we define acceptable use at the onset and discuss it with the students, and this acceptable use is aligned to the desired learning outcome of the specific assessment or a specific session. So as a recap, we do it in the design of our assessments, and there's no silver bullet such that use ChatGPT independently or do not use it at all.
So I actually have a policy that I drafted, and one of the things that we have three things maybe. The first one is acceptance. Just accept that students have access to ChatGPT. You cannot ban it. They have access to the internet, so that's the first one. The second is really understanding the program learning goals and the course learning outcomes. At the end of the day, what is it that you want the students to learn? Is it skills? Is it something that involves something that's very hands-on? Or is it about just acquiring knowledge, meaning reading something and then, okay, I understand it, right? And then the third one is we have to think about the purpose of the students using the tool. It could be ChatGPT, it could be Google, right? And also the scope and the limited, like what we said, usage boundaries. But the usage boundaries could be a little tricky because you cannot just say no. So this is where pedagogy would come in. We have to take a more pedagogical lens. For example, this is a classic example I'm using right now. Previously, I would ask students to read a text and then record a video to provide their insights and assessments, or write an essay about it. This time around, I'm running the same course. I'm not going to do that anymore because I know that they have access to ChatGPT. Instead, we're going to have open discussions in the classroom, breakout session, engage in dialogue with your classmates, and then share insights in the classroom. So there are ways. Ultimately, for those two setups, I have the same course learning outcome, right? So again, when we craft this, we have to think about what is it that we want students to learn at the end of the day, and that is how we, I think, define the boundaries.
So going off that, Chris, you want to?
Yeah, maybe just to add, I think about it this way. We already have the Google search. It's just that this is a Google search in steroid. So it reshapes the way we look at things. We should reshape the way we look at things. Asking the right questions, for example, becomes very important. Finding connection on how these questions can be answered by machines will become important. And lastly, I would like to mention this, that European Union actually in 2022 already come up with some guidelines on the use of artificial intelligence in classroom setting. It should be transparent. There are 6 items. Promote social well-being. There should be no discrimination. And for each of the current utilization of AI, whether it's a scoring system, etc., there is already a set of questions that you need to answer. If you satisfy it, then you're good to go. So we will now put this eventually as part of the white paper policy that we'll be writing with regards to the Philippine setting.
So going off the answers here, so there's clearly going to be a shift in what skills are important in this new environment. So what sort of skills, in this case, are important that we have to actually redesign curriculums around these skills, given that we have AI enhanced students essentially.
So I'm not a curriculum expert, but we do roll out programs that augment resources in high-need public schools. So the way that I am experiencing this current discussion really is it's bringing up 2 things for me. So we support teachers. That's really the baseline of a big part of our work, because one of our core programs is the teacher fellowship program, where we select promising young Filipinos, we train them, and then we deploy them to high-need public schools for 2 years. So that's one big piece. We also support tenured public school teachers. talent that exists within the system and provide them with professional development opportunities and individualized coaching. On one level, I guess the conversation around ChatGPT or generative AI in general is, for me, really showing how this is an assistive tool. And that can happen and that can add value across multiple levels, but the first one being like enhancing content. How are you teaching? How are you facilitating learning in your classrooms, right, and in the communities we serve? And number two is support. Like how do you reduce workload for teachers, right? So there were a few really, really interesting examples about how you can generate lesson plans, can create personalized pedagogical notes, right, for depending on what your students need. But I think the broader thing that this is bringing up for me in the context of the work that we do in our organization is the conversation of equity. And that's where, you know, policies, guidelines, people aligning on best practices, not necessarily to regulate the technology, but more to provide a roadmap for how to engage with it critically, how to use it so that, you know, it's trained to recognize models or contexts that are diverse and not just Western based, right? Because for me, that is what is at the forefront of this conversation. We work in public schools where literacy rates are sometimes as low as 20% of your student population. So you talk about really innovative, groundbreaking technology like ChatGPT, but many of our kids are not reading and are not numerate. So amidst, like in a world where ChatGPT exists and all of this potential exists, how can you also bridge these cutting edge things with very, very foundational needs and gaps that exist among the least of us, right? And so I guess for me, like beyond curriculum and beyond, which are also really very important, I think there's an important question too about, okay, there are skills that we need to develop and those remain true even if ChatGPT never existed, like critical thinking, ethics, right? The ability to even write prompts in Google or in ChatGPT is a skill, right? That we take for granted maybe because we have reached a certain level of educational attainment, but many in our communities won't even know how to type a prompt or how do you even ask the right question to get the answer that you want to generate. So I guess that maybe requires a bit more discernment and reflection on our part as people who have access to this. How do you make this more democratized and make it more equitable and not necessarily discriminatory for others?
Just a quick rejoinder to that, Navi. We have now a new career that has been brought forth because of ChatGPT and these language models. In LinkedIn, there's always a post hiring for prompt engineers. So,
And yes, again, I'm a fan of these sort of abilities. In fact, some of our best performing staff here are actually from these sort of abilities. And yes, for a very long time, this is one of the problems of the Philippines in general. Physics, for example, we only have 30% qualified teachers to teach physics. And one of the best programs that I've ever seen that works very well is the Learning as Foundation created by the Verditos. Ma'am Maribik and Sir Chris Verditos in Bohol. And the result is impressive. The result is very impressive. We're looking at the number of book-cut passers, their national achievement test scores, etc. And their idea during the time is simple. That there will be one strong faculty who will be teaching physics, and this will be broadcast to everyone. Now imagine this is one of the things that can be done with ChatGPT. Now, you can ask ChatGPT specifically that this is an 18-year-old individual coming from this background with this perspective, and so far these are her or his previous grades. Can you teach this person calculus? And it will be able to provide a very defined curriculum, a very defined structure for that particular person. If we can optimize this, this definitely will revolutionize the education in the country and probably will allow that equity, that inclusiveness to be present. But yes, I agree with you. One of the most important policies that we should have now is infrastructure. In most provinces, internet is still a bottleneck, no? Not even 1 megabyte. And in countries like, for example, Finland, 10 megabyte per second is a human right. We don't have that here.
and it's a free-for-all era now. has released its source codes. You can create ChatGPT deployments to help our learning ecosystem. So to all tech people in the room, it's a challenge for you. Go get that open API key and deploy your own ChatGPT learning platforms.
I think let's bring it back to helping our teachers in this new era, right? So a lot of the people on this panel are not just highly educated, but also technically trained. We're working in that field. We're familiar with the research in that area. And I'm guessing that a lot of the teachers that teach in basic education and even in higher education may not be familiar with computers, programming, AI. So what sorts of things can we do to help those teachers be more prepared for the incoming wave of this phenomenon?
Maybe as a first actionable step is for our School of Executive Education and Lifelong Learning at AIM to start rolling out these kinds of training as well for public teachers, right? And since Michelle mentioned, you can train your own LLM, right? ChatGPT, your own one. So that could somehow alleviate the data privacy part, and you can tailor fit it to be distributed across the country, and then just have a few being trained in the actual school, like at AIM, and then the deployment as well will be facilitated by these trained instructors. Maybe that's one that I can think of.
And yes, essentially, as a rejoinder, put this in the bigger projects. So actually, we will have the topic in BNU, FEU, etc. But with this a national part of the national consciousness. Again, I have no problem with students learning this technology because they will be needing it. But the problem right now is if the teachers don't understand this technology, then we will have a problem when you assess the critical thinking component of the students. So make this a bigger project and it becomes a responsibility of especially those who are in this group.
So we've actually picked out a bunch of questions from the online participants. So I'll be reading out some of them and maybe any of you can jump in and sort of answer them. So I think one of the common questions that we got in the Q&A box was about the authenticity of information generated by ChatGPT in an academic context. So what are ways that we can effectively counter false information that students may be exposed to because of their use of these sorts of models? As a teachers, how do we guide our students to be more critical about these things?
So the same review of prior work standards prevail even prior to ChatGPT. So students should look at only reputable sources. We know that ChatGPT can give us a baseline, a starting point, where we should look, where we should dive into. But as with Wikipedia, which we don't really recognize as an academic a source, a proper citation, will teach our students that this is how they approach ChatGPT too, only that it's maybe a bit better. So we only look at human experts, publications, industry practitioners, their work, and those are our reputable sources. That's the same expectation that will prevail even in this generative AI era.
Yeah, if I may add to that, it's important for teachers as well. Let's say in my class, I do encourage the use of ChatGPT wherever appropriate. But before we do that, we have to ensure that we have discussed the limitations of the technology. It must be clear that everything here is probability, that LLMs are really all about patterns, not so much about facts, because they are not trained to look at facts, but patterns in the language. If that is clear, then you can start saying that if you use ChatGPT, you have to be accountable with the output, right? Knowing that it's not necessarily factual. It can be fluent, not necessarily factual. So accountability and responsibility, they have to be very clear, at least in the policy for students to use them.
Just to add a little bit different from the perspectives shared. know that ChatGPT right now is smarter than your average expert. So who is right? So that will be one of the questions, and it will get better. The goal is that the hallucination should be 1/10 of humans' hallucination, usual hallucination. I do hallucinate when I, for example, drink alcohol, etc. But no, that is one of the goals. No? So to me, the more critical component right now is to have that level train, include in the training the idea of open-mindedness. Wikipedia, for example, the reason why it's super good, super powerful, although sometimes there are wrong facts in Wikipedia, is because the most important thing for human to connect to another individual is to have that so-called minimum viable truth. That you can be falsified and that you're not super perfect. And maybe that's a good thing with the ChatGPT. But then again, the most important thing is to have an open mind at the end. That this might be wrong, and because technology improves, science improves, then maybe in the future it will give you a different truth.
If I may add to that, I just want to caution because Chris's statement is quite, I agree, but it's scary. Like, it's for students, remember that even though it's smarter than the average person or the average field, it can still be wrong for your purpose. So we're not looking at averages when we perform in class. So just keep those in mind and the risks that you're taking when you're using the tool.
Can I just jump in? Because I know you're going to move to the next question. So, I do agree with Chris when he said we don't need to teach students about ChatGPT because they already know how to use it. It's probably absolutely right. And I think a lot of our discussion, conversation need to happen with teachers and professors, right? But I think it's very, very important we teach what is a proper usage of tools like ChatGPT to our students. It's an ethical issue. You know, I was thinking that, you know, these young people that we hire, I'm just thinking of my own institution and AIM, right? We ask them to write a report, we ask them to prepare something. If they're smart enough to use ChatGPT to generate, and the older generations don't know how to discern, how to coach, that's not right. I was also thinking about plagiarism. You know, we tell the students what plagiarism is and how to avoid it and what the consequences would be if they plagiarize their work, right? So the principle is very simple. On the other hand, application of that in terms of what's ethical use, what's accountability. I don't know university freshmen would understand I have to be accountable when I use ChatGPT. I don't think so. It's going to be one more area where educators need to take the issue seriously, and you know, we don't have to teach them how to use it in terms of how to write the prompt, how to train, and I'm sure they can figure it out better than us. But I think there's a huge responsibility in terms of how to use it properly, ethically, in a way that is consistent with all other principles and values. I think that's going to be the key.
And I'm just reading some of the messages there in the chat box right now. That some of the faculty, some of the teachers, they mentioned that they can figure out if it is GPT written. I caution you with that particular perspective because you can ask ChatGPT to make a little bit of grammatical error and make it sound like me. You can do that. So it will be, so that's part of prompt engineering 101 actually.
Yeah, actually you can feed, I just told Jikyung about this earlier, the student can feed their past works, and then the GPT will learn that style, and then just ask ChatGPT to generate something with a style that, you know, with your own style, with a few grammatical errors here and there.
So yeah, you can create a space similar to Barack Obama if you want to, because we've been talking one senator in particular. He's a speechwriter, and then they realize that all these things can be done very easily, and you can connect quickly to the audience, etc.
Yeah, so I was just gonna say that what she said about values and about, I guess, deeper philosophy really resonated with me. Because I think regardless of the tool, but maybe more, especially more salient with this one because it's incredibly powerful, it really goes down to values work and mindsets. Because I think we all assume here that, you know, we share ethics, right? There's value for the truth, there's value for rigor, there's value for, you know, scientific basis or evidence, but out there, maybe, that value isn't shared. I mean, you see it in the post-truth discussions, right? Like even in social media, take out ChatGPT, but even in the content that you consume on social media, elections have been won and lost on disinformation, right? And people don't always share the same recognition that a pursuit of truth is important. So I think not to overly philosophize, but that is the bigger battlefield, honestly, because
I'll give you a really good example. So this will kind of accentuate what Chris said, right? So this is a real life example. I'm not making this up. At a top business school, a student failed resit exam, or what we call removal exam, right? The professor asked, you know, this is the last chance, how could you fail? And you know what the student answer was? The Wi-Fi was turned off, I couldn't use ChatGPT. And the student thought that that was a valid reason. This is why I am very, very concerned. It's not about how to use, how to write the prompt. It's really making them understand, appreciate whole other array of ethical issues and values and ethics. And it's not as simple as technical competencies we're talking about. And I think just as how we talk about all the things we talked about in terms of what educators need to keep in mind, I think we need to also look at it from the student's perspective. And at what level, you know, talking to elementary school students should be different. How we talk to the high school students, college students, PhD students writing thesis. It's all different issues that we need to tackle, and I don't think that can be underestimated.
Very much agree with that. Again, we go back to the fundamentals. The purpose of education is twofold. One, to prepare the students for the future and the job. And second is to change the culture such that things like this, the things that we believe are important, we value. And we, as educators, should be among those who should be able to propagate this particular concept. So, yeah, I think we will not be able to finish the discussion when it comes to this one, but this is a very rich topic for a lot of debate and this discussion.
Yeah, so it seems like the conversation is moving towards more about the importance of philosophy, right? The domain of philosophy, ethics, and deciding what things matter, right? And I think in that vein, there's this question that's been popping up in the Q&A box about existential risks, especially from an educator's perspective. Maybe after hearing talk for today, perhaps some teachers are actually concerned about their future as educators and what their place is in this new world. So one of the questions that showed up was, can AI render educators obsolete? What will the impact be on job creation and the future of certain courses, like IT courses, access to information, development of writing skills? How should we be thinking about these things?
I don't think it will destroy the teaching profession. I think it will change it. It'll transform it, but I don't think it'll render it redundant or useless. I think even more so in the advent of technology like this, the human component, precisely to our point earlier about ethics and philosophy, you know, this reckoning of what it means to be human and live in this world. I think that is not something that any app or even generative AI can really fully capture and live through, right? In a way that's compelling for other people, especially for young people who are being educated. So I will say that as a point. I think for me though, it's super important to recognize that this type of technology is really unsettling. It can be. And I think as a starting point, when we engage people in a conversation about the potential of ChatGPT or the future, or what it holds for us, we first acknowledge that this can be really unsettling. And it's totally fine to feel unsettled and unsure and a little fearsome, right, for what this would hold. Because as you said in your last slide, quoting Gandalf, you don't know where, you know, what, yeah, exactly. Like nobody can project 5, 10 years into the future how the world would have changed. But I think the beginning of any honest, real conversations about this should begin with the acknowledgement of the core human emotions that we bring, experiences that we bring as we interact with technology like this.
Right, and then there's this article by Harvard, it's entitled AI with the Human Face, and it's related to this existential problem now that AI is prevalent. There are really existential, this is a sound anxiety or fear that some some roles would be replaced by AI, by generative AI. In fact, just very recently, Helpline, which fired humans, staff, after unionization. We know probably that's not the underlying cause, because it replaced this human counselors of anorexia and some mental disorders with chatbots. Now, AI can do that. The question is, should AI do that? Can a chatbot address the needs of patients suffering from anorexia? In the education perspective, can an automated educator replace the mentoring that we can give to our students? And the obvious answer is no. It cannot, or else our students would not enroll in institutions with warm bodies, right? They just go in maybe Coursera or go to YouTube, which has quasi-humans. But no, AI will not replace educators.
This is smiling. I know that he has different columnists, but that's why this is so nice. Right, for now, I think I will have to qualify for now. But we already have Coursera, all of this pre-recorded, and then you would think that, maybe students will not enroll anymore in AIM or in UP Diliman or in schools, but that's not the point of education, right? It's not just about getting the knowledge. But even if that is the only point, even if, let's just say yes, humans, not everyone has that capacity to actually teach themselves. Not yet anyway. For us, we feel like it's powerful because like what we said, we know what questions to ask. We know what we want to get from ChatGPT. But if you go to the remote areas and then you give them ChatGPT, they would still need teachers. They would still need people who would instruct them. So like what Mavi said, I completely agree. It's just going to be a shift of the task that we have to do. We will still need educators, definitely, but the role would definitely shift, the pedagogy would shift, and it's the same for all other AI technologies. They usually say that AI will wipe X jobs, but the way I view it is that it will wipe tasks of certain jobs, not necessarily the jobs. We will just be shifting. For example, I don't spend hours anymore writing emails, but instead I get to think about policy papers, all of these other things. So the educators will still be there because I don't think, not yet anyway, and individuals don't have not everyone has the diligence to teach themselves new things. They would really need someone to guide them.
So, full disclosure, data scientists here at AIM, the Access Lab, we have this existential problem. For 2 weeks, when ChatGPT was introduced, for 2 weeks, we were just discussing about this, trying to find fault to the ChatGPT's strength. For example, we asked question on combinatorics, it will give a wrong answer. We thought we found the weakness, but then 3 days later, we realized that we would be able to solve that answer eventually. So the point here is, and this is a realization, indeed, AI is a disruptive technology. Disruptive technology. When photography was first invented by the year in 1800s, they thought that painting is dead. Nothing can be done, painting is dead. Then somebody brought this in New York eventually, but that guy, the greatest value of that particular technology, photography, for journalists, was the moment that they were able to capture Mark Caswell days. and all of a sudden there's all these range of emotion because of such, and then eventually there will be videos, news items, etc. as a result of that. What I'm pointing here is that to the point that was given by these individuals here, it will have a different value eventually. And now that people are talking about metaverse significantly, that is a dimension different from the dimension that we are looking at here, there will be a lot of jobs in that space. There will be a lot of jobs for entertainment, for example. Okay, and this is where probably ChatGPT and all these new technologies and the role of the educators will naturally come in.
Okay, so at this point, maybe it's time to open the floor to our on-site participants for any questions that you may have. Any questions from our on-site participants?
Okay, hi, good afternoon. So my question, one of the panelists mentioned that, of course, given that this is a new technology, and you wouldn't want also to restrict innovation. In order not to overregulate, you mentioned that you allow also, you don't restrict of course here in this instance, higher education institutions or educators and using ChatGPT. But on the other side you also have to put a balance on how this can be used effectively. So what I would like to know is that what do you think should be the balance when it comes to regulation of ChatGPT in terms of teaching?
That's a super tough question because I would qualify it depends again on the learning outcomes. If it's writing, the skill of writing that I want my students to develop, definitely no ChatGPT, right? But if it's you have to communicate, for example, I don't care how you communicate your final research, then I'm okay with you using ChatGPT. So depending as well, this is what Chikyong said earlier, different levels of education, elementary, high school, college, higher education institutions, it will be very different. If it's executive education and lifelong learning, it will be a different policy as well. I think we need a committee. The government needs to form a committee. The educational institutions need to form a committee that will really look closely into this. And maybe the government is listening. If you're going to do this, make sure that you use ChatGPT first. It's important for us to understand what it can do and what its limitations are before we can opine on things and start writing policies. So I'm not so sure if it's a difficult question, but yeah, it needs conversation to continue.
Yeah, and yes, as an joiner, indeed, that is the goal. At the end of the day, ask the question of what is the learning outcomes, what do you intend to get as a result of this. For example, here at AIM, there are 3 subjects that we impose in all our programs. That is sustainability and ethics, data visualization and storytelling, and artificial intelligence. When it comes to data visualization and storytelling, my idea is that you can use whatever technology there is, ChatGPT, any generative AI, because at the end of the day, the goal is to make this subject make sure that you will be able to create an engaging and a compelling argument based and stories based on the things that you have. So to me, for at least for that particular program, for that particular course, you can use it. And one of the things that AI can do now is that it can give an unbiased score. Okay?
I have to put that in quotes.
Unbiased. Unbiased in the sense that it's not because I hate this student, those kind of things. So at least there was something that to complement your perspective.
So maybe just to briefly acknowledge the presence, of course, of Attorney Cindy Benitez Haro. She is the Executive Director at CHED.
Hi, ma'am.
So, actually, the reason why I'm asking is that I'm from government. and of course, as the one supervising higher education institutions, I would also like to get the perspective of those coming from higher education institutions. Because before we can effectively regulate, I want also to know, so on your level, what do you think is the regulation that we should impose on the level of our higher education institutions before we can formulate a national, well, a strategy on how we will regulate also on a national level. But I see I see your point that there should be a discussion first. What you have mentioned also that I would also like to see this also takes its course also before we take a look on how we can well, not regulate it, but see on how we can use it for, of course, for the betterment of teaching and learning. Thank you.
And maybe this is a message for the director, Chen. Because one of the things that we have seen here, this is something that we can do at AIM because we are a small school, we can change the curriculum. Actually, we change the curriculum every year. We put an elective so that all these changes can be incorporated immediately. Unfortunately, for big schools in the country, that is not being implemented. So this is one policy change that where we need to understand that there must be a way to make the curriculum changes and the regulatory policy updated quite regularly, very frequently.
So since Director qualified higher education, I would focus, ma'am, in big policy making, right? I would focus on the ethical concerns that we have. So algorithmic bias will be definitely one of it. And then data privacy would be another one. This is again in the context of education, using student data, for example, and ChatGPT. The third one would definitely be on the over-reliance of AI. That's something that we have to check as well, if we can have a policy on that one. And I don't know, the final one siguro is the digital divide, right? Not everyone has access to ChatGPT. If we start marking students based on their outputs from ChatGPT and then some students don't have access to it, would that be fair? So off the top of my head, these are the four things that, the ethical concerns that maybe we could start discussing to form this policy.
And some of these components are actually part of the national AI roadmap that we have creating a guardians and a national AI consciousness.
I think we have more questions from the audience.
NS Rule has a question.
I'm a rank outsider, and I love this conversation. The first of the conversation is empowering the teacher. My own concern essentially is empowering the students. Some of the biggest problems why our PISA scores, for example, are so bad is multimodal in a sense. One is simple. One is very simple. The very first one is just that students go to school hungry. And that's why they're stunting. And they come to school and they already have 30% of their neurons gone. But the other is teacher failures, teaching failures. And many teachers will impart information, pardon me. I have a very high regard for teacher because I am a teacher. And I made this mistake as well. Impart information and ideas to students, largely from outdated textbooks. Or probably textbooks which are actually laden with mistakes. And the other big problem is then they often resort to authority for validity. I am the teacher here, I know. You take my word for it. And that's that. My own take on empowering the student is making ChatGPT accessible to every student. Every student. Making the signals better in every elementary school. And you know what? Because monitoring teacher failing and performance is very hard. And you ask the principal to monitor, the interaction will be covered by social relations. ChatGPT, however, will not be so affected. What I'm saying is, if every student has ChatGPT in his hand or her hand, then every teacher had better get his act together. Because the student can simply say wrong. What you're doing is you know what the role of Asperger's syndrome students in the classroom. Asperger's syndrome students, you simply says wrong. And I'll tell you why. And that keeps the teachers on their toes like crazy. I don't want Asperger's syndrome students in my class because I'm put on the defensive all the time. But Asperger's syndrome student will not say anything that is incorrect. And most of the time, he will be correct. He will say, this is why you are wrong.
Right, and that would be an ideal world as I see, and is when all students have access, most students have access to ChatGPT, and these students would be able to say, ChatGPT, you're wrong, you're stupid.
And yes, actually, when we look at the piece of data, it is not just a survey of exams. It includes, among others, the performance of the teachers. One of the things that we've seen there, to your point, NS Raul, is that the biggest, one of the causally linked information that caused us to have that low score is the growth mindset. Lack of growth mindset that can be improved if the teachers are excited and open-minded. No? So this is an interesting perspective. Winston Churchill, the reason why Winston Churchill hates school is because he thinks that the teachers is more interested in the things that he doesn't know than the things he knows than the result of the exam. But yes, you're right. We can have that. We can empower students. It will be a very different story. It will be a different story, I think.
We'd also like to acknowledge the presence of National Scientist Raul Fabel. More questions? I think we have some questions at the back.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Alan from I just latched onto the earlier statement about making tailor-fit the education. Okay, I'm going to say more hypothetical and more opposed. Should we even get access to the LMS system, fuse that, and generate a specific, say, quiz for a particular student? I'd like to get the perspective of students that this time they're going to get tested on different sets of questions. How would that impact from a student perspective? Assuming policies will allow it. Having access to
And then the general idea of education is really to improve one's learning among others. Then one reason why you want to go physically to class in general is that so that I can compare and I will understand the concept of success. And success is about improvement, the change in the gradient, etc. So to me, that is a welcome development. That the scores will not just be based on the absolute strength of one, anchored on all the other one, but on your improvement as a student. But I think right now, hyper-personalization to that extent will not be easy. Will not be easy for various reasons.
So, okay, do we have any more questions from the audience?
Hi, I just wanted to pick up on what Maeve said earlier about recognizing that ChatGPT, or rather the need for adapting ChatGPT from the Western context to the Philippine context. So earlier I was very impressed by the video that Chris showed about a trailer describing the success story of Papa Masaysay. And I was under the impression that ChatGPT knew, or the generative model knew, that Carmen Success is a Philippine brand. But I was a bit troubled by the fact that the video showed a white male advertising the ice cream, and so I find it a bit problematic given the tense relationship of the Philippines with its colonial past. So, what can we do to ensure that these types of biases, and this of course extends to education. So what can we do? Because ChatGPT is an American invention. Can we tell them to streamline training on Philippine context?
Yes, that's true. There's this weird bias towards westernized, industrialized, rich and developed countries. And yes, let's continue to work for ChatGPT for free, all because all the data we put out there will be used to fine-tune, and we introduce our identity, our context, our data sets, and ChatGPT will be smarter because it recognizes us. So using ChatGPT in this side of the world will address that bias also, in a way.
To be technical about it, all the things that we need to do, and this is what we will be doing here at the Access Lab. Download the tokens. Tokens is the important thing that you need to train the system, and personalize it to make sure that there will be some level of weights given to the marginalized sector among others. That can be done. That's why we need to really understand this technology. That can be done. For example, for the Flicky video that I've shown a while ago, the problem with that is that again, you're right. No? There is no input videos coming from the Philippine setting. But the moment that you add this and then include that in the library, it will automatically be able to capture that. So the science is tokenize, include that, incorporate that in the ChatGPT. It should be, of course, a modified ChatGPT.
I think what gives me hope, just listening to, this could be a really ignorant take on this, but I think for tech like this, there might be significantly lower barriers to democratizing and diversifying the sources, because it's just like exactly a hashtag or maybe a filter or just content that you feed in, because this is something that we see even in education. So one of the difficulties that we encountered when we were trying to develop, for example, our own literacy program in Teach for the Philippines is a lot of the validated tools for assessment or even materials for teaching literacy are Western developed. And so you would have materials like at a really low level, referring to things like blogs, which if you bring to our provinces, like the kid is gonna look at that and like, what's a log? Like, kahoy lang yan sa punong kahoy, right? Like, what's a log? And so these contextual differences don't matter, because in order to make instruction relevant to your students, like the references that you use have to be like something that is very much present in their lived experience. Even something as familiar to us as trains, right? For them, it's like, I've never seen a train, like, but I've seen a boat. So shouldn't that be the reference that you use? But for us, for example, to get that feedback into what I would quote unquote call regulators, right? Or mediators of spaces where, what kind of assessments are sound and what things to roll out, and what's an empirically proven effective way of teaching literacy or things like that. That's historically been really mediated, and only a select few have had access, right? I mean, it's gotten better over time, but nowhere near the potential of something like ChatGPT, where the feedback loop might be drastically quicker and even instant. So that gives me hope. But yes, I was also disturbed by the same video. Like, why man? Just
That's Flicky, by the way. That is Flicky. No, it's not ChatGPT. Because the video is coming from Flicky. But one of the things to probably will comfort you, Wayne, is to note that we are generally, at least Filipinos, are well represented in the ChatGPT training for a reason that we are the social media capital, among others, text capital, and we have 110 million population, which has been included in the training of the ChatGPT. So that's why you can see that it knows balot, it knows jeepney, it knows all those things, and the language is very good in Filipino. Not as fluent as that in the things that I read compared to Korean or Japanese.
So, sorry, thanks for the response. I just want to add, I remember reading a debate on Twitter before between Yan Lekang, the head of Facebook research, as well as Timnit Gebru, who's from Google, and she got fired because of her paper on large language models. And they had this debate that, according to Timnit Gebru, it's not just enough to diversify your training set, it's also important to work on the algorithms to limit the bias. I just want to add that in addition to the comments you made earlier about having to use ChatGPT so that it has a lot of diverse data to work on, I think it's also important that we also work on algorithms and not just on the data.
No, for sure. I just wanted to add to that, Wayne, that's a very important point, and that's something that we cover in the MSDS program. When we talk about algorithmic bias, the data bias is just here, all right? And then you have a lot of like performance, metric bias, all of the other model biases. So even in the data bias, there's multiple. There's the representation data bias, there's the historical data bias, and this is why we need properly trained data scientists. Not just those who can tweak hyperparameters, maybe for some tasks, right? But if you want to have culturally, sound model, it's important that our data scientists like yourself would truly understand which part of the algorithm building can you inject or can you tone down, for example, certain biases in the data. Thank you for pointing that out.
And I like that example, Wayne. We will not go against young Deacon because there is a very good chance that the one who will be welcoming our undergrad here at AIM and our next batch of MS Data Science will be no other than Young Deacon, the Turing awardee and the godfather of AI, this August.
Okay, thank you everyone for your questions. There are a lot of questions, especially from those online. Unfortunately, we can't really answer all of them. Although we have compiled the list of all of the questions that we have received, and we'll be working on that to maybe see if we can get another, perhaps somebody to respond, or perhaps another event like this, where we can engage with the online audience more. Okay. So at this point, thank you again to all of our panelists. Let's give them all a round of applause. But before we close the event, I'd like just to get the reaction of Attorney Cindy, who's representing Chad.
Okay, I would like to start with a comment with a report that I have read. So there was a report of a lawyer who responded to a complaint by filing a pleading in court using ChatGPT. And then it was discovered that the citations that the jurisprudence that he used was false. They were non-existent. So I would like to point out that this problem transgresses not only in education, it transgresses other facets also of our lives. But from my perspective, I think what really distinguishes this technology from other technological advancement is, of course, its capability to mimic a person's thinking. If before technology will really assist us, this technology even goes further because it somehow puts this AI in another level, in the same level, in some aspect with us. But of course, we acknowledge the benefits of ChatGPT. In fact, I am also a student and I'm a mother of 4. And what this benefits me is that this gives me free time, actually, because instead of me doing, looking at the citations, making sure that I'm properly citing the resources, well, ChatGPT can do that. And it can do that efficiently. So it gives me time to do what I love, what I want to do. But on the other side, of course, we have to balance it with the risk. As I mentioned in that report, what is really constraining is the accountability part, because the failure of that lawyer to really take a look at that resources or at that jurisprudence, the accountability is lacking. So that is one area that we should really take into consideration when using ChatGPT, because after all, we will be the ones also accountable for those that we are saying that we are producing. And then second, of course, sometimes it presents falsehood confidently as facts. So it's very concerning, especially when it comes to things like in the justice system. If that judge did not verify that resources, that they may be swayed. They may be swayed, and there may be problems with our judicial system. So the critical thinking part on our stakeholders must really be strengthened so that they will be able to discern what is falsehood or what should they verify first. And then the other one also is, of course, furthering the digital divide. I think one of the panelists also already mentioned that there are many regions here in the country that there are no access to internet, and it is true because we made the survey in our higher education institutions, in our state universities and colleges, and would you imagine that there are many SUCs in which the access to internet are still lacking. So, if there are higher education institutions which are very technologically advanced, of course, like AIMS, and then there are SUCs, there are state universities and colleges, local universities and colleges, students of these public institutions which do not have access to internet. So, how would this be of use, or how would this be beneficial to them also? So, as on a policy-making level, on a national level, I don't know if we can keep up with, of course, with the technological advancements, with making policies for technological advancements. But I think our responsibility as part of the national government is to provide a platform in which our stakeholders will be able to use effectively this technology, but in a responsible manner. I think that is one that we should emphasize, a responsible use by our stakeholders, which would be a challenge not only for our educators, but also for the legislators and for the policymakers. Thank you for our panelists also for making this a very good discussion.
Thank you very much. Hello. Thank you very much, Attorney Cindy. So to end today's forum, we have National Scientist Rodolfo Bejer to give us a few words for closing remarks.